In the 7th to 8th century, the religion of Islam began to spread all over the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. Around this time, St. John of Damascus, also known as Damascene, who was an Arabic Christian, became increasingly aware of the heresies this religion taught. And in one of his writings on heresies, he deals with Islam and specifically Muhammad and refutes the false teachings that he espoused. This text became very influential, as it was one of the first major refutations put forward against Islam, and today we'll cover a few of the objections Damascene raised, and tie it into modern scholarship and the state of Islamic beliefs today. Damascene starts out by stating, there is also the superstition of the Ishmaelites, which to this day prevails and keeps people in error, being a forerunner of the Antichrist. A false prophet named Muhammad has appeared in their midst. This man, after having chanced upon the Old and New Testaments, and likewise, it seems, having conversed with an Arian monk, devised his own heresy. Then, having insinuated himself into the good graces of the people by a show of seeming piety, he gave out that a certain book had been sent down to him from heaven. He had set down some ridiculous compositions in this book of his, and he gave it to them as an object of veneration. Some Muslims might object to John's account of Muhammad having conversed with an Arian monk, since in their own Islamic tradition, Muhammad meets with a Nestorian Christian instead. But this story of the Nestorian Christian actually comes much later after Damascene's account in history. Dr. Daniel Janosic writes, however, since he does not mention the involvement of a monk, this could indicate an earlier rendition of the story, before it took on the Nestorian persuasion, and the monk was given a name. As with the comparison of early and late hadiths, when a story contains more specific references to people or events, it is usually an indication that the story has been embellished through the passage of time, and the earliest version is the more correct one. After describing the Quran's account of the birth of Jesus, Damascene goes on to talk about Islam's view on Jesus' crucifixion. And he, Muhammad, says that the Jews wanted to crucify him in violation of the law, and that they seized his shadow and crucified this. But the Christ himself was not crucified. He says, nor did he die, for God, out of his love for him, took him to himself, into heaven. Damascene goes on to call this, and another claim made by the Quran, a ridiculous belief. And truly it is ridiculous in the realm of history. For example, the scholar Ehrman, someone whom Muslims love to utilize, says that one of the most certain facts of history is that Jesus was crucified on orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. On this topic, New Testament scholar Dominic Crossan states further that he, Jesus, was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. Doubting the historicity of the crucifixion is contrary to historical reasoning and demonstrates an inconsistent and biased standard on the part of the Muslim. The crucifixion account of Jesus is early and simply passes due to the criterion of embarrassment and it being multiply attested. Many modern Muslims will say that people were mistaken and crucified the wrong person, such as Simon of Cyrene, or that Allah had made it seem as if Jesus was crucified, but it was not actually him. On the first claim, modern scholarship would simply reject such an assertion, as there's simply no evidence to support that conclusion. In fact, it would be on the contrary. On the second point, that Allah deceived the people into thinking Jesus was crucified is problematic, as Allah would be able to deceive the Jewish people while knowing that by doing this he would start a false religion that would lead people to hell. This position as well would be reductio ad absurdum, or self-refuting, because God by his very nature cannot deceive. Damascene also cites a quotation from the Quran about their belief that Jesus never claimed to be God. And he, Muhammad, says this, that when the Christ had ascended into heaven, God asked him, O Jesus, didst thou say, I am the Son of God and God? And Jesus, he says, answered, Be merciful to me, Lord. Thou knowest that I did not say this, and that I did not scorn to be thy servant. But sinful men have written that I made this statement, and they have lied about me, and have fallen into error. And God answered and said to him, I know that thou didst not say this word. Yet again, Damascene believes this to be a ridiculous and extraordinary belief that Muhammad espoused, as our earliest Christian witnesses never held to such a claim. For example, Paul, whose teachings were accepted by Jesus' apostles, says this in his letter to Titus, While we wait for the blessed hope and the manifestation of the glory of our great God and Savior, Jesus Christ. Now, of course, Paul's letters are some of our earliest writings in the New Testament, and we need not to worry that Paul simply made up this claim, since the very disciples of Christ accepted Paul's teachings. Further, to doubt that Paul is not claiming Jesus as God, but is making reference to the Father in this verse, goes against general biblical scholarship. As in the Jerome Biblical Commentary, put together with the help of many scholars, including the well-respected Raymond Brown, states that this verse is an eloquent expression of Paul's belief in the divinity of Christ. After this, the commentary goes on to refute the claim that it refers to the Father. Even the earliest written gospel, Mark, clearly portrays Jesus as the divine Messiah that Daniel foretells as one that will have an everlasting and eternal reign, and one who will come on the clouds of heaven and make divine judgments. On this matter, another respected New Testament scholar, Dale Allison, notes, Jesus' words about the coming of the Son of Man were, one might conjecture, deliberately open-ended because their realization had to be left to the deity. Riding clouds and assembling the quick and the dead for judgment are beyond human ability. Of course, this is very much contrasted to Islam, which does not teach an eternal reign or messiahship of Jesus, nor is their view anywhere close to a divine Messiah. As a side note, if you want to help support me, consider buying my new released merchandise, which is based on St. Thomas Aquinas. Thank you for any support. Damascene presents another problem. Muhammad tells the people not to do anything such as marriage and buying property without witnesses. These would be considered normal, ordinary acts. But what about extraordinary acts, such as Muhammad receiving his first revelation? According to Damascene, we should ask why there are no witnesses to justify this claim. When we ask again, how is it that when he, Muhammad, enjoined us in this book of yours, not to do anything or to receive anything without witnesses, you did not ask him, first do you show us by witnesses that you are a prophet, and that you have come from God, and show us just what scriptures there are that testify about you. On this note, Dr. Daniel Janosik writes, John also finds fault with Muhammad's rumor that the scriptures that he gave to his people were brought down from heaven without witnesses, even though other ordinary acts such as marriage and buying property required witnesses. The real travesty, according to John, was that Muhammad then expected his followers to obey the pronouncements. Now, John of Damascus makes a couple more claims, but these will be covered in a future video. Suffice to say, Muhammad was clearly mistaken on multiple issues of history, such as the Crucifixion, in which to reject leads to a self-refuting position. He also lacks knowledge on the deity of Christ, since our earliest accounts clearly show that Jesus proclaimed divinity. Finally, Damascene finds issues with evidence in trusting Muhammad's revelation, since Muhammad was the only one to witness it. According to John of Damascus, Muhammad's claims were ridiculous and contradict the earliest Christian witnesses. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe, and if you want to help support the channel, consider becoming a channel member. As always, God bless.